You are enslaved, not by chains or bars, but by your own emotions. Every day, anger controls your thoughts, upset dictates your actions, and inner turmoil destroys your peace. You react to traffic like a wild animal. You explode at your family over minor inconveniences. You carry resentment for weeks over perceived slights. You have become a prisoner of your own emotional reactivity, and it is destroying your life. But what if I told you that this slavery is entirely voluntary? What if I told you that every moment of anger you experience is a choice you are making, and that you have the power to choose differently? What if I told you that 2,000 years ago, a group of philosophers developed a system so powerful that it could grant you complete immunity to emotional disturbance, regardless of what happens around you? The Stoics understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover. Anger is not caused by external events, but by your judgments about those events. The traffic jam does not make you angry. Your belief that traffic should flow smoothly makes you angry. Your co-worker does not upset you. Your expectation that people should treat you with perfect consideration upsets you. The weather does not ruin your day. Your demand that reality conform to your preferences ruins your day. This distinction between external events and internal judgments is the key to emotional freedom. Once you understand that your anger is generated by your own thinking, you gain the power to think differently and therefore feel differently. This is not positive thinking or denial of reality. This is the systematic application of reason to emotion, the deliberate training of your mind to respond to life's challenges with wisdom instead of reactivity. Today, you will learn 8 rules that will destroy anger at its source and grant you the inner peace that comes from emotional mastery. These are not temporary coping strategies or superficial techniques. These are fundamental shifts in how you perceive reality that will transform not just how you feel, but who you are as a person. The path ahead requires courage because it demands that you take complete responsibility for your emotional state. It requires honesty because it forces you to examine the irrational beliefs that fuel your anger. Most of all, it requires commitment because emotional mastery is not achieved overnight, but through daily practice and unwavering dedication to growth. Are you ready to break free from the prison of anger and upset? Are you ready to become the master of your inner world? Then let us begin. Rule 1. Judge only what is truly under your control. The first and most fundamental rule for destroying anger is to restrict your judgments to only those things that are genuinely within your control. This sounds simple, but it requires a complete revolution in how you think about responsibility, fairness, and what you have the right to expect from life. Most of your anger comes from judging things that are outside your control, as if they should be different. You judge other drivers for not driving the way you want them to drive. You judge your family members for not behaving the way you think they should behave. You judge the government, the economy, the weather, and countless other external factors based on how well they align with your preferences. This is the root of all emotional suffering, the demand that things outside your control should conform to your desires. When reality fails to meet these demands, which it inevitably will, you experience anger, frustration, and upset. You are essentially arguing with reality, and reality always wins. The Stoic solution is radical. Stop judging external things entirely. Reserve your judgments only for your own thoughts, choices, and actions. Everything else exists as it is, neither good nor bad, but simply as raw material for you to work with skillfully. Understanding true control. Before you can apply this rule, you must develop crystal clarity about what is actually under your control. Most people have a completely distorted understanding of their sphere of influence, believing they can control things they cannot, and failing to recognize the power they do possess. You cannot control other people's behavior, attitudes, or decisions. You cannot control traffic patterns, weather conditions, or global events. You cannot control your company's policies, your government's decisions, or random accidents. You cannot control aging, illness, or death. You cannot even control your own emotions directly, as anyone who has tried to force themselves to feel differently knows. What you can control is much smaller but infinitely more powerful. Your attention, your interpretations, your responses, and your choices. You can control what you focus on, how you interpret events, how you respond to challenges, and what actions you take. These may seem like small levers compared to the vast forces that shape your external circumstances, but they are the only levers you have, and they are sufficient to create a life of inner peace and fulfillment. The practice begins with developing acute awareness of when you are judging things outside your control. Throughout the day, notice when you find yourself thinking thoughts like "this person should not be driving so slowly," "my boss should be more reasonable," "the weather should be better for my plans," or "this situation is unfair." Each of these thoughts represents a judgment about something outside your control, and each one creates the potential for anger when reality fails to comply with your demands. The moment you notice such a thought, immediately redirect your attention to what you can control in the situation. Redirecting judgment to controllable factors. When you catch yourself judging external circumstances, immediately ask yourself, "What can I control in this situation?" This simple question shifts your mind from powerless complaint to empowered action, from victim mentality to personal responsibility. Stuck in traffic? You cannot control the traffic, but you can control how you use this time. You can listen to educational podcasts, practice breathing exercises, call a friend, or simply enjoy a few minutes of quiet reflection. You can control your following distance, your lane choice, and your departure time for future trips. Dealing with a difficult person? You cannot control their personality, their mood, or their behavior, but you can control how you interact with them. You can set clear boundaries, communicate your needs directly, choose your battles wisely, and maintain your own standards of behavior, regardless of how they behave. Facing a professional setback? You cannot control market conditions, company politics, or your boss's decisions, but you can control how you respond to challenges. You can update your skills, expand your network, improve your performance, or explore new opportunities. This redirection of judgment from external to internal factors does more than just reduce anger, it empowers you to take effective action. When you focus on what you cannot control, you waste energy on futile resistance. When you focus on what you can control, you channel that same energy into productive efforts that actually improve your situation. The practice of emotional detachment. Emotional detachment does not mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means developing the ability to observe external events without immediately creating stories about how they should be different. This detachment allows you to respond to situations based on what would be most effective, rather than what would satisfy your emotional impulses. Practice viewing external events as you would view the weather. You do not get angry at rain for being wet or at snow for being cold. These are simply natural phenomena that exist as they are. Similarly, you can learn to view human behavior, social conditions, and life circumstances as natural phenomena that exist as they are, without the added layer of judgment that creates emotional disturbance. This does not mean accepting injustice or failing to work for positive change. It means approaching change efforts from a place of clear thinking rather than emotional reactivity. You can work to improve conditions without being angry that they are not already improved. You can set boundaries without being upset that boundaries are necessary. You can address problems without being outraged that problems exist. The goal is to become like a skilled surgeon who can operate on a patient without becoming emotionally disturbed by the sight of blood. The surgeon cares deeply about the patient's well-being, but maintains the emotional equilibrium necessary to perform at the highest level. Similarly, you can care deeply about outcomes while maintaining the emotional stability necessary to work toward them effectively. Building the habit of controlled judgment. Developing this skill requires consistent daily practice. Each morning, identify 3 situations you are likely to encounter that day where you typically judge external factors. Commit to practicing controlled judgment in these specific situations. For example, if you typically get frustrated with slow cashiers at the grocery store, decide in advance that you will focus only on what you can control: your patience, your preparation, your choice of checkout line, and your use of waiting time. When you find yourself starting to judge the cashier's speed, immediately redirect your attention to these controllable factors. Keep a daily log of situations where you successfully applied controlled judgment and situations where you fell back into judging external factors. This is not for self-criticism, but for building awareness and tracking progress. Over time, you will notice that your automatic response shifts from external judgment to internal focus. The transformation that occurs through this practice is profound. As you stop wasting mental energy on things you cannot control, you have more energy available for things you can control. As you stop creating stories about how reality should be different, you develop the clarity to see reality as it actually is. As you stop demanding that external factors conform to your preferences, you discover the freedom that comes from needing nothing outside yourself to feel strong and capable. Rule 2. Separate facts from interpretations. The second rule for destroying anger requires you to develop the crucial skill of distinguishing between what actually happens and the stories you tell yourself about what happens. Most of your anger is not caused by events themselves, but by your interpretations of those events, and these interpretations are often distorted, incomplete, or entirely fictional. When someone cuts you off in traffic, the fact is that their car moved into your lane. Your interpretation might be that they are rude, inconsiderate, or deliberately disrespecting you. When your partner forgets to do something you asked, the fact is that the task was not completed. Your interpretation might be that they do not care about you, that they are irresponsible, or that they are trying to frustrate you. These interpretations feel true because they arise automatically and because they confirm your existing beliefs about how the world works. But they are not facts, they are stories your mind creates to make sense of incomplete information. And because these stories often cast you as a victim and others as villains, they generate anger, resentment, and upset. The Stoic practice of separating facts from interpretations allows you to see reality more clearly and respond more effectively to whatever is actually happening, rather than to the fictional narratives your mind creates about what is happening. Understanding the interpretation process. Your mind is constantly creating interpretations because it needs to make sense of the world around you. This process happens so quickly and automatically that you rarely notice the distinction between what you observe and what you assume. Someone speaks to you in a certain tone, and you immediately know they are angry. A friend does not return your text message, and you immediately know they are ignoring you. Your boss gives you feedback, and you immediately know they are criticizing you. But these interpretations are not knowledge-aligned. They are assumptions based on limited information, filtered through your personal experiences, expectations, and fears. The same event can be interpreted completely differently by different people, or even by the same person in different moods. The tone you interpret as angry might reflect tiredness, stress, or concentration. The unreturned text might be due to a busy schedule, a dead phone battery, or simply forgetting. The feedback you interpret as criticism might be intended as helpful guidance or professional development. This does not mean that your interpretations are always wrong, but it does mean that they are always uncertain. And anger based on uncertain interpretations is anger based on assumptions rather than facts. The practice of factual observation. Learning to separate facts from interpretations requires developing the discipline to pause between observation and conclusion. When something happens that typically triggers anger, stop and ask yourself, what exactly did I observe? What are the indisputable facts of this situation? Facts are observable, measurable, and verifiable. My coworker interrupted me during the meeting is a fact. My coworker is disrespectful and trying to undermine me is an interpretation. My partner came home 2 hours late is a fact. My partner does not care about our dinner plans is an interpretation. Practice describing situations using only factual language. Instead of saying he was rude to me, say he spoke loudly and did not make eye contact. Instead of saying she deliberately ignored my suggestion, say she did not respond when I made my suggestion. Instead of saying they are trying to make my life difficult, say the new policy requires additional paperwork. This factual language might seem awkward at first because it lacks the emotional drama that interpretive language provides, but this emotional neutrality is exactly what allows you to see situations clearly and respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. Exploring alternative interpretations. Once you have identified the facts of a situation, deliberately generate multiple possible interpretations for those facts. This exercise demonstrates how many different stories could explain the same events and prevents you from becoming attached to the first interpretation that occurs to you. If someone cancels plans at the last minute, possible interpretations include they are inconsiderate and do not respect your time. They had an emergency or unexpected obligation. They are struggling with anxiety or depression. They double-booked themselves and had to make a difficult choice. They are sick and do not want to spread illness. They receive new information that changed their priorities. All of these interpretations could explain the same facts, and without additional information, you have no way of knowing which one is accurate. Recognizing this uncertainty prevents you from generating anger based on assumptions and allows you to respond based on what you actually know. This practice also develops empathy and emotional intelligence. By considering multiple perspectives, you become better at understanding human behavior and more skilled at giving people the benefit of the doubt when their actions are ambiguous. Investigating your interpretations. When you notice yourself creating interpretations that generate anger, investigate these interpretations with the same skepticism you would apply to gossip or unverified news. Ask yourself, what evidence do I have that this interpretation is accurate? What other explanations could account for what I observed? Am I making assumptions based on past experiences that may not apply to this situation? Often, you will discover that your anger-provoking interpretations are based on mind-reading, fortune-telling, or other cognitive distortions. You assume you know what someone is thinking, why they acted a certain way, or what they intended to accomplish. You predict negative outcomes.
You assume you know what someone is thinking, why they acted a certain way, or what they intended to accomplish. You predict negative outcomes based on limited information. You generalize from single incidents to sweeping conclusions about people's character or motivations. These mental habits developed because they helped you navigate social situations quickly, but they also create unnecessary emotional suffering when they generate interpretations that may be completely inaccurate. The goal is not to eliminate interpretation entirely, which would be impossible, but to hold your interpretations lightly and remain open to new information that might change your understanding of situations. Responding to facts rather than stories. When you successfully separate facts from interpretations, you can choose to respond to what actually happened rather than to what you imagined happened.
This leads to more effective communication, better problem solving, and significantly less anger. Instead of confronting someone about their disrespectful behavior, you can address the specific actions that concerned you. Instead of assuming malicious intent, you can ask questions to understand their perspective. Instead of defending against attacks that may not have been intended as attacks, you can focus on clarifying communication and finding solutions. This approach often reveals that the problems you thought you were facing were different from the problems you were actually facing. The anger you felt was directed at fictional scenarios rather than real situations, and addressing the real situations often proves much easier than fighting the fictional ones. Moreover, when you respond to facts rather than interpretations, others are more likely to respond positively, because they do not feel the need to defend against accusations that may not accurately reflect their intentions or motivations. Rule 3. Practice the view from above. The third rule for destroying anger involves developing the ability to step outside your immediate emotional experience and view situations from a broader perspective. This technique, known to the Stoics as the view from above, allows you to see your current challenges in the context of the larger patterns of human experience and the vast scale of space and time. Most anger arises from taking your immediate circumstances too seriously, from believing that your current problems are uniquely significant and that your emotional reactions are justified by the magnitude of what you are facing. The view from above reveals that most of what triggers your anger is actually quite small when seen from a broader perspective, and that your reactions often cause more suffering than the original events themselves. This is not about minimizing genuine problems or dismissing legitimate concerns. It is about developing the perspective that allows you to respond to challenges proportionally rather than catastrophically, and to maintain your emotional equilibrium even when facing real difficulties. Understanding perspective and scale. Imagine that you could rise above your current situation and observe it from the perspective of someone watching from a great height. From this vantage point, you can see not just your immediate circumstances, but the broader context in which they exist. You can see other people dealing with their own challenges, the cyclical nature of human problems, and the temporary nature of most difficulties. Now imagine extending this perspective through time. View your current anger-provoking situation from the perspective of next week, next month, next year, or next decade. How significant will this issue seem then? How much of your current emotional intensity is justified by the actual long-term impact of what is happening? Extend the perspective even further. Consider your situation from the viewpoint of human history, recognizing that countless people have faced similar challenges and that your particular version of these universal human problems is neither unique nor unprecedented. Consider it from the perspective of the cosmos, recognizing the tiny scale of human concerns within the vastness of space and time. This is not nihilistic thinking, but liberating thinking. When you realize that your current anger is focused on something that will be forgotten within days or weeks, you can choose to release that anger and direct your energy toward things that actually matter in the long term. Practicing historical perspective. One powerful way to develop the view from above is to study how similar problems have been faced throughout human history. The challenges that feel overwhelming to you today have been faced by millions of people across cultures and centuries. Understanding this can provide both comfort and wisdom. If you are angry about political developments, read about how people navigated political turmoil in other eras. If you are upset about relationship problems, study how humans have dealt with love, betrayal, and conflict throughout history. If you are frustrated by career setbacks, learn about how others have overcome professional challenges and built meaningful careers despite obstacles. This historical perspective reveals that human nature and human problems remain remarkably consistent across time and place. The specific details change, but the fundamental challenges of living with other people, pursuing meaningful goals, and dealing with uncertainty and loss remain the same. Understanding this continuity helps you realize that your problems are not evidence that life is uniquely difficult for you, but proof that you are participating in the universal human experience. This realization can transform anger and isolation into acceptance and connection. Applying cosmic perspective. The Stoics regularly practiced imagining their problems from the perspective of the cosmos. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the Roman Empire at its height, regularly reminded himself that even his vast responsibilities were insignificant when viewed from the perspective of the universe as a whole. This cosmic perspective is not meant to make you feel small or unimportant, but to help you distinguish between what deserves intense emotional investment and what does not. Most of the things that trigger your anger fall into the latter category. Consider the age of the Earth, the size of the galaxy, the number of humans who have lived before you and will live after you. Consider the fact that the sun will eventually burn out, that all human civilizations will eventually end, that the universe itself will eventually reach a state of maximum entropy. From this perspective, the fact that someone cut you off in traffic, that your coworker took credit for your idea, or that your neighbor plays music too loudly, becomes almost comically insignificant. The anger you feel about these things is like getting upset that a single grain of sand is not perfectly round. This does not mean that your life does not matter, or that you should not work to improve your circumstances. It means that you can work for improvement without the emotional intensity that comes from believing that your current problems are cosmically significant. Using temporal perspective for emotional regulation. When you feel anger rising, immediately practice the temporal perspective exercise. Ask yourself, will this matter in 5 years? Will I even remember this in 5 years? What would I advise someone else to do if they were angry about something this significant? Often, you will realize that you are investing tremendous emotional energy in something that will be completely forgotten within a short time. This realization alone can dissolve anger instantly, not because you are suppressing it, but because you are seeing clearly that the anger is disproportionate to the actual significance of the situation. For situations that will matter in 5 years, ask whether your anger is helping you address them effectively. Usually, you will find that anger clouds your judgment and leads to less effective responses than calm, strategic thinking would produce. The goal is not to become indifferent to everything, but to reserve your emotional intensity for things that truly deserve it, and to handle everything else with the calm efficiency that comes from proper perspective. Developing routine perspective. Practices. Make the view from above a regular part of your mental routine. Each morning, take a few minutes to consider your planned activities from the perspective of a year from now. Which of today's potential stressors will seem insignificant from that perspective? How can you approach today's challenges with the wisdom that this broader view provides? Each evening, review the day's frustrations and annoyances from historical and cosmic perspective. How many people throughout history have faced similar challenges? How significant are these problems when viewed from the perspective of your entire life or human existence as a whole? When you feel anger beginning to arise, immediately practice the perspective shift. Imagine yourself rising above the situation and viewing it from a great height. Extend your view through time, seeing the situation as one brief moment in a much larger story. Ask yourself what response would seem most reasonable from this broader perspective. Over time, this practice becomes automatic. Your mind naturally begins to view challenges from a broader perspective before anger has a chance to take hold. You develop what the Stoics called cosmic consciousness. an awareness of your place in the larger scheme of things that brings both humility and peace. Rule 4. Use negative visualization to build resilience. The fourth rule for destroying anger involves regularly imagining loss, setbacks, and difficulties before they occur. This practice, known as negative visualization or premeditatio malorum, might seem counterintuitive, but it is one of the most powerful tools for building emotional resilience and preventing anger when challenging situations arise. Most anger comes from the gap between expectations and reality. When things go differently than you anticipated, when people behave differently than you expected, when circumstances develop differently than you hoped, you experience anger because reality has violated your assumptions about how life should unfold. Negative visualization closes this gap by helping you anticipate challenges before they arise. When you have already imagined and mentally prepared for difficulties, they lose much of their power to disturb your peace. Instead of being shocked and angered by setbacks, you can respond with the calm competence that comes from mental preparation. Understanding the purpose of negative visualization. Negative visualization is not pessimism or catastrophic thinking. It is not about dwelling on worst-case scenarios or expecting the worst from life. It is a strategic mental exercise designed to prepare you for reality as it actually exists, rather than reality as you wish it existed. Life includes loss, disappointment, conflict, and suffering. These are not aberrations or signs that something is wrong. They are normal parts of human existence. When you pretend that these difficulties will not occur, or when you organize your mental life around the assumption that things will always go smoothly, you set yourself up for anger and upset when reality inevitably includes challenges. Negative visualization prepares you for this reality by helping you mentally rehearse how you will respond to difficulties before they occur. This preparation serves multiple functions. It reduces the shock and anger when problems arise. It helps you develop effective response strategies in advance, and it increases your appreciation for good circumstances by reminding you how easily they could change. The practice also builds what psychologists call stress inoculation. Just as exposing your body to small amounts of pathogens builds immunity, exposing your mind to imagined difficulties builds emotional immunity to actual difficulties. Practicing basic negative visualization. Begin with simple, common scenarios that often trigger anger. Imagine getting stuck in traffic on your way to an important appointment. Visualize the situation clearly: the slow-moving cars, the ticking clock, the rising frustration. Now imagine yourself responding with calm acceptance rather than anger. Picture yourself using the time productively, arriving at your destination in a good mood despite the delay, and handling the situation with grace. Imagine receiving criticism at work, even harsh or unfair criticism. Visualize the scenario: your boss or colleague delivering the feedback, your initial emotional response, the temptation to become defensive or angry. Now imagine yourself listening carefully, asking clarifying questions, extracting any useful information, and responding professionally regardless of how the criticism was delivered. Imagine a friend or family member disappointing you by canceling plans, forgetting an important date, or failing to follow through on a commitment. Picture the disappointment, the temptation to take it personally, the urge to express anger or resentment. Now imagine yourself responding with understanding, maintaining the relationship, and handling the situation without creating additional drama. The key is to visualize both the challenging scenario and your ideal response to it. This mental rehearsal programs your mind to respond thoughtfully, rather than reactively, when similar situations actually occur. Advanced negative visualization practices. As you become comfortable with basic negative visualization, expand the practice to include more significant challenges. Imagine losing your job and having to find new employment. Visualize the financial stress, the uncertainty, the blow to your ego, and the practical challenges of job searching. Now imagine yourself handling this situation with dignity, using it as an opportunity for growth, maintaining your relationships and values throughout the process. Imagine the death of someone you love. This is perhaps the most difficult visualization, but it is also one of the most important. Picture the grief, the practical complications, the changes this loss would bring to your life. Now imagine yourself handling this loss with strength, honoring the person's memory, supporting others who are also grieving, and eventually finding meaning and peace despite the pain. Imagine losing your health, your home, your reputation, or other things you currently take for granted. The goal is not to become morbid or anxious about these possibilities, but to mentally prepare for them so that if they occur, you can respond with resilience rather than being overwhelmed by anger, despair, or shock. These more advanced practices should be done carefully and with the right mindset. The goal is preparation and appreciation, not worry or depression. If you find that negative visualization increases your anxiety rather than building your confidence, scale back to simpler scenarios or seek guidance from someone experienced in Stoic practices. Using negative visualization for appreciation. One of the most powerful applications of negative visualization is using it to increase appreciation for your current circumstances. Regularly imagine losing the things you currently have: your health, your relationships, your home, your abilities, your opportunities. Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that you can no longer walk, see, or hear. Picture the adjustments you would have to make, the things you would miss, the challenges you would face. Now open your eyes and appreciate the miracle of your current abilities. Imagine losing your most important relationships. Picture life without your spouse, your children, your closest friends. Imagine the loneliness, the regret, the things you would wish you had said or done differently. Now look at these people with fresh appreciation for their presence in your life. Imagine losing your home, your job, your financial security. Picture the stress, the uncertainty, the practical challenges this would create. Now appreciate the security and comfort you currently enjoy, recognizing them as gifts rather than entitlements. This practice transforms your relationship with your current circumstances from entitled expectation to grateful appreciation. When you regularly imagine loss, you are less likely to take good things for granted and less likely to become angry when they are temporarily disrupted. Building daily resilience through preparation. Make negative visualization a regular part of your mental routine. Each morning, spend a few minutes imagining potential challenges you might face that day and visualizing yourself handling them well. This is not about expecting problems, but about being prepared for them. Before important events, meetings, or interactions, visualize potential complications and prepare your responses. If you are giving a presentation, imagine technical difficulties, hostile questions, or unexpected interruptions, and plan how you will handle these scenarios calmly and professionally. Before traveling, imagine delays, cancellations, lost luggage, or other common travel problems, and prepare mentally to handle them without anger or distress. Before social events, imagine potential conflicts, awkward moments, or disappointments, and plan how you will maintain your composure and enjoy the event despite these possibilities. This preparation does not guarantee that problems will not arise, but it ensures that when they do arise, you will be ready to handle them skillfully, rather than being thrown off balance by surprise or anger. Over time, this practice builds tremendous emotional resilience. You become someone who is genuinely difficult to upset because you have mentally prepared for most of the challenges that life can throw at you. Your friends and colleagues will notice your calm competence in difficult situations, and will often ask how you manage to stay so composed under pressure. Rule 5. Apply the discipline of desire. The fifth rule for destroying anger requires you to fundamentally change your relationship with wanting and expecting. Most anger arises from desires that have been frustrated, from wanting things to be different than they are, and becoming upset when reality fails to conform to your preferences. The discipline of desire teaches you to want what happens, rather than demanding that what happens should match what you want. This does not mean becoming passive or giving up on goals and preferences. It means learning to hold your desires lightly, to prefer certain outcomes without being attached to them, and to find peace regardless of whether your preferences are satisfied. This shift eliminates the primary source of anger, while actually making you more effective at achieving your goals. When you are not emotionally attached to specific outcomes, you can think more clearly about how to influence those outcomes. When you are not angry about setbacks, you can respond to them more skillfully. When you are not upset by obstacles, you can navigate around them more efficiently. Understanding the nature of desire. Desire itself is not the problem. Attachment to desire is the problem. Having preferences, goals, and aspirations is natural and healthy. The issue arises when you transform preferences into demands, when you move from "I would like this to happen" to "this must happen" or "I deserve for this to happen." This transformation from preference to demand creates what the Stoics called passion, which they understood as an emotion based on false judgment. The false judgment is that your happiness, worth, or well-being depends on external circumstances aligning with your preferences. When you judge that you need certain outcomes to be happy, you create vulnerability to anger whenever those outcomes are threatened or denied. When you judge that you deserve certain treatment from others, you create vulnerability to resentment whenever that treatment is not provided. When you judge that life should be easier, fairer, or more pleasant than it is, you create vulnerability to frustration whenever reality fails to meet these expectations. The discipline of desire involves returning to preferences without attachments, wanting things while accepting that you may not get them, and finding your sense of well-being in your own responses rather than in external outcomes. Practicing preference without attachment. Begin by identifying your strongest attachments, the outcomes you believe you need in order to be happy or successful. These might include career advancement, relationship goals, financial targets, health outcomes, or social recognition. Notice the emotional intensity that surrounds these desires and the anger you feel when progress toward them is blocked. For each attachment, practice reframing it as a preference. Instead of "I must get this promotion," practice thinking "I would prefer to get this promotion, but I can be content and successful regardless of whether it happens." Instead of "My partner must treat me with respect," practice thinking "I prefer respectful treatment, but my sense of worth does not depend on how others treat me." This reframing is not about lowering your standards or giving up on important goals. It is about holding those goals in a way that allows you to work toward them effectively without being destroyed emotionally if they do not materialize exactly as you envision. When you prefer outcomes without being attached to them, you can invest full effort in pursuing them while maintaining emotional equilibrium regardless of results. This, paradoxically, often makes you more successful because you are not sabotaging your efforts with the anxiety and anger that come from attachment. Accepting what you actually receive. The discipline of desire includes learning to genuinely appreciate what you actually receive, rather than focusing on what you do not receive. This requires a fundamental shift from an attitude of entitlement to an attitude of gratitude. Most people approach life with an unconscious sense of entitlement, believing that they deserve certain outcomes, treatment, or circumstances. When reality fails to provide what they believe they deserve, they become angry and resentful. This anger accomplishes nothing except making them miserable and less effective at improving their situation. The alternative approach is to view everything you receive as a gift rather than as something owed to you. Your health, your relationships, your opportunities, your abilities, and even your challenges can all be viewed as gifts that provide opportunities for growth, learning, and contribution. This does not mean accepting unfair treatment or failing to work for improvement. It means approaching improvement efforts from a place of gratitude for what you have, rather than anger about what you lack. This shift in attitude makes you more pleasant to be around, more resilient in the face of setbacks, and more creative in finding solutions to problems. When you stop feeling entitled to specific outcomes, you also stop feeling victimized when those outcomes do not materialize. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you can ask, "How can I respond to this skillfully?" This question leads to empowerment rather than resentment. Transforming obstacles into opportunities. The highest level of the discipline of desire involves learning to want the obstacles and challenges you encounter because they provide opportunities for growth that would not be available in their absence. This is perhaps the most difficult aspect of Stoic practice, but it is also the most transformative. Every obstacle contains within it the seed of equivalent benefit, but only if you approach it with the right mindset. Traffic jams provide opportunities to practice patience and use time productively. Difficult people provide opportunities to develop interpersonal skills and emotional regulation. Professional setbacks provide opportunities to reassess priorities and develop resilience. The key is to shift your focus from what the obstacle is preventing you from doing to what the obstacle is allowing you to develop. This shift transforms every challenge from a source of anger into a source of growth. This practice requires initially forcing yourself to find the benefits in unwanted situations, but over time it becomes natural. You begin to genuinely appreciate challenges because you understand their role in your development. You stop wasting energy wishing they were different and start investing energy in extracting their lessons. Developing gratitude for what is. The discipline of desire culminates in developing genuine gratitude for your life exactly as it is, including its difficulties, disappointments, and imperfections. This is not about pretending that everything is perfect or that you should not work for improvement. It is about recognizing that your current circumstances, whatever they are, provide everything you need for growth and fulfillment. This gratitude is not dependent on external conditions being favorable. It is based on the recognition that you have been given the opportunity to practice virtue, to develop character, and to contribute to others regardless of your circumstances. The person in prison can practice gratitude for the opportunity to develop patience and inner strength. The person facing illness can practice gratitude for the opportunity to experience compassion and courage. When you find reasons to be grateful for even difficult circumstances, anger becomes impossible because anger requires resistance to what is. Gratitude and resistance cannot coexist in the same moment. By cultivating gratitude for what is, you eliminate the mental conditions that create anger. This practice begins with finding small things to appreciate in difficult situations and gradually expands to encompass larger challenges. With consistent practice, you can develop the ability to find genuine gratitude even in circumstances that would previously have triggered intense anger. Rule 6. Master the initial impression. The sixth rule for destroying anger focuses on the crucial moment when you first encounter a potentially anger-provoking situation. The Stoics understood that the quality of your entire emotional response is determined by how you handle the initial impression, the first moment when you become aware of a challenging circumstance. Most people allow their initial impressions to trigger automatic emotional reactions that then spiral into sustained anger. Someone cuts them off in traffic, and within seconds they have created an elaborate story about the other driver's character, intentions, and worth as a human being. A colleague receives recognition they wanted, and they immediately construct a narrative about unfairness, politics, and their own victimization. The master of initial impressions pauses between the external event and the emotional reaction, creating space for wisdom to intervene. In this pause, you can choose how to interpret what has happened, and therefore how to feel about it. This choice, made consistently over time, transforms you from someone who is constantly victimized by circumstances into someone who maintains emotional sovereignty regardless of external conditions. Understanding the power of first moments. The initial impression is the split second when your mind first encounters a situation and begins to interpret its meaning. This moment is crucial because it sets the trajectory for everything that follows. If your initial interpretation casts you as a victim and others as villains, you will experience anger. If your initial interpretation focuses on learning opportunities and personal growth, you will experience curiosity and engagement. Most people are completely unconscious during this crucial moment. They allow their minds to automatically interpret situations based on past conditioning, emotional habits, and unconscious assumptions. This automatic interpretation then feels like reality rather than choice, and they believe their anger is justified by what happened, rather than created by how they interpreted what happened. The Stoic practice involves developing conscious awareness of this initial moment and learning to pause before allowing automatic interpretations to take hold. This pause creates the opportunity to choose your interpretation deliberately, rather than accepting the first story your mind creates. This is not about denial or positive thinking. It is about recognizing that every situation can be interpreted in multiple ways and choosing the interpretation that serves your growth and well-being, rather than one that creates unnecessary suffering. Developing the pause practice. The pause practice begins with simply noticing when potentially anger-provoking situations occur. Throughout the day, pay attention to moments when you feel the first stirrings of irritation, frustration, or upset. These early warning signs indicate that your mind is beginning to create an interpretation that could lead to anger. The moment you notice these early signs, deliberately pause. Take a deep breath. Create a brief space between the external event and your emotional reaction. In this space, remind yourself that you have a choice about how to interpret what has happened. Ask yourself, what story is my mind creating about this situation? Is this story helpful or harmful? What other ways could I interpret what just happened? What interpretation would allow me to respond most effectively? Initially, this pause may feel artificial or forced. You may find it difficult to interrupt your automatic emotional reactions. This is normal and expected. Like any skill, mastering the pause requires practice and patience. Start with minor irritations where the emotional stakes are low, and gradually work up to more challenging situations. The goal is not to eliminate all emotional reactions, but to ensure that your reactions are based on conscious choice rather than unconscious habit. You want to respond to situations based on wisdom rather than conditioning. Reframing techniques for common triggers. Different types of situations require different reframing approaches. Developing a toolkit of alternative interpretations for common triggers allows you to quickly shift your perspective when these situations arise. For interpersonal conflicts, practice reframing others' behavior in terms of their own struggles rather than their intentions toward you. The rude cashier may be having a difficult day. The impatient driver may be rushing to handle an emergency. The critical colleague may be feeling insecure about their own performance. This reframing does not excuse poor behavior, but it prevents you from taking it personally and becoming angry. For professional setbacks, practice reframing obstacles as opportunities for growth and learning. The project that was cancelled may have freed you to work on something more aligned with your interests. The promotion you did not receive may have protected you from responsibilities you were not ready for. The criticism you received may contain valuable feedback that will improve your future performance. For daily inconveniences, practice reframing minor frustrations as opportunities to practice patience and acceptance. The slow internet connection becomes a chance to step away from screens and connect with people. The cancelled flight becomes an opportunity for an unexpected adventure or quiet reflection. The broken appliance becomes a chance to practice resourcefulness and adaptability. The key is to have these alternative interpretations readily available so you can apply them quickly when triggering situations arise. With practice, positive reframing becomes as automatic as negative interpretation once was. Building emotional resilience through interpretation. Choice. As you develop skill in managing initial impressions, you build tremendous emotional resilience. Situations that once reliably triggered anger lose their power to disturb your peace. You become genuinely difficult to upset because you have trained your mind to find constructive interpretations for challenging circumstances. This resilience is not based on avoiding difficult situations or pretending they do not affect you. It is based on the genuine ability to find meaning, opportunity, and growth potential in whatever circumstances you encounter. This skill transforms you from someone who needs favorable external conditions to feel good into someone who can maintain inner strength regardless of external conditions. Moreover, this emotional resilience has practical benefits beyond just feeling better. When you are not angry, you think more clearly. When you are not upset, you communicate more effectively. When you are not frustrated, you solve problems more creatively. By mastering your initial impressions, you become more competent in every area of life. Advanced practices for impression management. As you become proficient at managing initial impressions in everyday situations, you can apply this skill to more significant challenges. Practice maintaining perspective and finding constructive interpretations when facing major losses, serious conflicts, or life-changing events. The death of a loved one can be interpreted as a devastating loss or as a reminder to cherish relationships while they exist. A serious illness can be interpreted as a cruel injustice or as an opportunity to discover inner strength and appreciate life more deeply. A job loss can be interpreted as a failure or as a chance to pursue new opportunities that would not have been available otherwise. These advanced applications of impression management do not minimize the real pain and difficulty of serious challenges. They provide a framework for processing these challenges in ways that promote growth and resilience, rather than bitterness and despair. The ultimate goal is to develop such skill in interpretation choice that you can find constructive meaning in any circumstance while still taking appropriate action to improve situations when possible. This combination of acceptance and action, meaning-making and problem-solving, represents the highest level of emotional mastery. Rule 7. Remember the impermanence of all things. The seventh rule for destroying anger involves developing deep awareness of the temporary nature of all circumstances, emotions, and experiences. Most anger is intensified by the unconscious assumption that current difficulties are permanent, or that favorable circumstances should last forever. When you truly understand that everything is temporary, you can maintain perspective during challenges and avoid taking temporary setbacks as permanent defeats. The doctrine of impermanence teaches that whatever you are experiencing right now, both pleasant and unpleasant, will eventually change. The traffic jam will end. The difficult project will be completed. The challenging relationship phase will resolve one way or another. The physical pain will subside. The emotional distress will pass. This understanding transforms your relationship with both positive and negative experiences. You can endure difficulties more easily when you remember they are temporary, and you can appreciate good times more fully when you remember they will not last forever. This awareness eliminates much of the resistance that creates anger while increasing gratitude for positive experiences. Understanding the nature of impermanence. Everything in your experience is constantly changing. Your body is different today than it was yesterday. Your thoughts and emotions flow and shift throughout each day. Your relationships evolve continuously. Your circumstances change regularly, sometimes gradually and sometimes suddenly. Yet your mind often operates as if current conditions are permanent. When you are stuck in traffic, your mind reacts as if you will be stuck forever. When someone treats you poorly, your mind reacts as if this treatment defines the relationship permanently. When you face a professional challenge, your mind reacts as if this challenge represents your permanent situation. This illusion of permanence creates unnecessary suffering because it makes temporary difficulties feel overwhelming and permanent. When you remember that everything passes, you can endure current challenges with greater equanimity because you know they will not last forever. The practice involves regularly reminding yourself of impermanence, especially during moments when anger begins to arise. Instead of fighting against current circumstances as if they were permanent fixtures of your life, you can accept them as temporary experiences that will eventually resolve. Applying impermanence to emotional states. Your emotions themselves are impermanent. The anger you feel right now will pass. The frustration will subside. The irritation will fade. Understanding this allows you to observe your emotions with greater detachment, knowing that they are temporary experiences rather than permanent aspects of your identity. When you feel anger rising, remind yourself, this emotion is temporary. It will pass. I do not need to act on it or feed it. I can simply observe it and allow it to run its course. This perspective prevents you from identifying with angry emotions or believing that they represent truth about your situation. Practice observing your emotions the way you might observe weather patterns. You notice that it is raining, but you do not identify yourself as a rainy person. You notice that the wind is blowing, but you do not take the wind personally. Similarly, you can notice that anger is present without making it part of your identity or believing it will last forever. This detached observation of emotions often causes them to dissipate more quickly because you are not feeding them with resistance or story-making. When you simply acknowledge anger as a temporary experience and allow it to be present without fighting it or acting on it, it often fades naturally. Using impermanence for perspective during challenges. When facing difficult circumstances, regularly remind yourself that these circumstances are temporary. The challenging phase at work will end, the family conflict will resolve, the financial pressure will ease, the health issue will improve, or you will adapt to it. The learning curve will flatten. This is not about false optimism or denial of real problems. It is about maintaining accurate perspective on the temporary nature of all circumstances. Even serious challenges eventually change, and remembering this prevents you from becoming overwhelmed by current difficulties. Practice the phrase, "This too shall pass," during challenging moments. Let this reminder help you maintain hope and perspective when circumstances feel overwhelming. Remember that humans have survived and thrived through difficulties far greater than what you are currently facing, and that your current challenges will eventually become memories. You can also use impermanence to motivate appropriate action. If current circumstances are temporary anyway, you might as well work to influence them in positive directions rather than simply enduring them passively. The knowledge that everything changes can inspire you to be an active participant in creating positive change rather than a passive victim of circumstances. Appreciating good times. Through impermanence awareness. Paradoxically, remembering that good times are also temporary can increase your appreciation and enjoyment of them. When you truly understand that your current health, relationships, opportunities, and pleasures will not last forever, you can savor them more fully in the present moment. Practice conscious appreciation of positive experiences by reminding yourself of their temporary nature. When spending time with loved ones, remember that these moments are precious because they are limited. When enjoying good health, remember that physical vitality is temporary and not to be taken for granted. When experiencing professional success, remember that circumstances change and appreciate current opportunities. This awareness prevents you from taking good things for granted and motivates you to make the most of favorable circumstances while they exist. It also reduces the anger and resentment that arise when good times end because you expected them to be temporary from the beginning. The knowledge that nothing lasts forever can transform your approach to daily life, helping you notice and appreciate small pleasures and positive moments that you might otherwise overlook in the rush toward future goals. Building acceptance through impermanence. Practice. Regular contemplation of impermanence builds deep acceptance of life's inevitable changes and losses. When you truly understand that everything you currently have will eventually be gone, you can hold your possessions, relationships, and circumstances more lightly, appreciating them without clinging to them desperately. This acceptance does not mean becoming passive or uncaring. It means engaging fully with life while understanding that loss and change are natural parts of the human experience. You can love deeply while accepting that loss is inevitable. You can work hard for goals while accepting that success is temporary. You can enjoy good health while accepting that aging and illness are part of life. Spend time regularly contemplating the impermanence of specific aspects of your life. Consider your current living situation, knowing that you will eventually live somewhere else. Consider your current job, knowing that your career will eventually end. Consider your current relationships, knowing that they will change and eventually end through death, if not through other circumstances. This contemplation is not morbid but liberating. It frees you from the fear of loss by helping you accept loss as natural. It reduces anger about unwanted changes by helping you understand that all change is inevitable. It increases gratitude for what you currently have by reminding you that it will not last forever. Daily practices for impermanence awareness. Make awareness of impermanence a regular part of your mental routine. Each morning, take a moment to remember that this day will never come again, that the experiences you have today are unique and temporary. Each evening, Reflect on the day's experiences, knowing that they are now memories that will fade with time. When you encounter frustrating situations throughout the day, immediately remind yourself that these situations are temporary. When you experience pleasant moments, consciously appreciate them while remembering their temporary nature. When emotions arise, observe them as temporary weather patterns in the sky of your awareness. Keep physical reminders of impermanence visible in your environment. This might be a dying flower, a burning candle, or a photograph that reminds you of the passage of time. These reminders help maintain awareness of transience during busy periods when you might otherwise forget this crucial perspective. Practice the impermanence meditation regularly. Sit quietly and contemplate the temporary nature of your thoughts, your emotions, your body, your relationships, and your circumstances. Notice how this contemplation affects your attachment to current conditions and your resistance to unwanted changes. Rule 8. Transform anger into constructive action. The eighth and final rule for destroying anger involves learning to channel the energy of anger into productive action rather than destructive emotion. Instead of being victimized by anger or trying to suppress it completely, you can transform it into a powerful force for positive change in your life and the lives of others. Anger often contains valuable information about problems that need to be addressed, boundaries that need to be set, or injustices that need to be corrected. Rather than dismissing this information or being overwhelmed by the emotion, you can extract the useful elements while discarding the destructive aspects. This transformation requires developing the skill to pause when anger arises, analyze what it is telling you about your situation, and then take appropriate action based on wisdom rather than emotion. This approach allows you to address legitimate problems without being destroyed by the emotional turmoil that typically accompanies anger. Understanding the message behind anger. Anger is often a secondary emotion that masks underlying concerns about fairness, respect, safety, or values. When someone treats you rudely, the anger may reflect a concern about being respected. When you face an injustice, the anger may reflect your values about fairness. When someone violates your boundaries, the anger may reflect a need for safety and autonomy. Before taking any action based on anger, pause and ask yourself, what is this anger telling me? What underlying need or value is being threatened? What legitimate concern does this emotion contain? This analysis helps you distinguish between the useful information anger provides and the destructive emotional charge that typically accompanies it. Often you will discover that your anger is pointing toward real issues that deserve attention. Perhaps someone is consistently taking advantage of your kindness. Perhaps you are tolerating treatment that violates your principles. Perhaps you are failing to advocate for yourself in important situations. These insights can guide constructive action even after the emotional intensity has subsided. Sometimes you will discover that your anger is based on unrealistic expectations or misunderstandings rather than legitimate grievances. In these cases, the appropriate action is to adjust your expectations or seek clarification rather than to confront others or try to change external circumstances. Converting emotional energy into strategic action. The physiological arousal that accompanies anger represents energy that can be channeled toward constructive purposes. Instead of dissipating this energy through emotional outbursts or allowing it to create internal tension, you can direct it toward solving the problems that triggered the anger in the first place. This conversion requires first allowing the initial emotional intensity to subside before taking action. Anger clouds judgment and leads to responses that often make situations worse rather than better. The goal is to harvest the energy and motivation that anger provides while applying them through clear thinking rather than emotional reactivity. When you feel anger arising, immediately commit to taking constructive action within 24 hours, to address the underlying concern. This commitment transforms you from a passive victim of circumstances into an active agent working to improve your situation. It also gives you something concrete to focus on rather than ruminating on the triggering event. The action you take should be strategic rather than reactive. If someone has treated you poorly, consider whether direct communication, boundary setting, reduced contact, or other responses would be most effective. If you are facing an injustice, consider whether advocacy, documentation, legal action, or other approaches would create positive change. Developing communication skills for difficult conversations. Many situations that trigger anger require direct communication to resolve effectively. Learning to have these difficult conversations skillfully allows you to address problems without creating additional conflict or damage to relationships. Effective anger-based communication focuses on specific behaviors rather than character judgments, describes the impact of those behaviors without assuming malicious intent, and requests specific changes rather than demanding that others should be different people. This approach increases the likelihood that others will respond positively to your concerns. Practice using I statements that describe your experience rather than you statements that attack the other person's character. Instead of "you are so inconsiderate," try "I felt frustrated when our plans changed at the last minute." Instead of "you never listen to me," try "I would appreciate it if you could put down your phone while we're talking." Focus on future behavior rather than past grievances. Instead of relitigating every previous incident, clearly describe what you would like to happen differently going forward. This approach feels less threatening to others and is more likely to produce actual change. When having these conversations, maintain the goal of solving problems rather than proving that you are right or making others feel bad. This problem-solving orientation keeps the conversation constructive and increases the likelihood of reaching mutually acceptable solutions. Setting and maintaining boundaries. Much anger arises from allowing others to violate your boundaries repeatedly. Transforming this anger into constructive action often involves clearly establishing boundaries and consistently maintaining them, even when doing so is uncomfortable or creates conflict. Boundaries are not walls designed to punish others, but guidelines designed to protect your well-being and maintain healthy relationships. They specify what treatment you will and will not accept, what behaviors you will and will not tolerate, and what consequences will follow if your boundaries are violated. Effective boundary setting requires clarity about your own limits, direct communication about those limits to relevant people, and consistent follow-through when boundaries are tested. This process often feels difficult initially, especially if you have been accommodating inappropriate behavior for an extended period. Start with small, clear boundaries that are easy to maintain consistently. As you build confidence and skill in boundary setting, you can address larger issues. Remember that setting boundaries is not about controlling others, but about taking responsibility for your own well-being. When others resist your boundaries or try to make you feel guilty for establishing them, view this resistance as confirmation that the boundaries were necessary. People who respect you will adjust their behavior when you clearly communicate your limits. Those who argue with your boundaries are demonstrating why those boundaries are needed. Creating positive change in larger systems. Sometimes anger points toward problems that extend beyond personal relationships to larger systems, organizations, or communities. Transforming this anger into constructive action might involve advocacy, activism, education, or other efforts to create positive change on a broader scale. Effective systems change requires the same principles as personal change: clear thinking rather than emotional reactivity, strategic action rather than impulsive responses, and persistent effort rather than one-time gestures. Channel your anger about injustice into sustained efforts to create the changes you want to see. This might involve volunteering for organizations working on issues you care about, contacting elected representatives about policy concerns, educating others about important topics, or using your professional skills to contribute to positive change. The key is to move from complaint to contribution, from criticism to construction. Remember that meaningful change typically happens gradually through the accumulated efforts of many people rather than through dramatic individual actions. Your contribution may seem small in isolation, but it is part of a larger movement toward improvement that depends on individuals choosing to act rather than simply feeling angry about problems. Building long-term emotional regulation skills. The ultimate goal of transforming anger into constructive action is to develop such skill in emotional regulation that you rarely experience destructive anger at all. Instead, you develop the ability to notice when your values or needs are being threatened and to take appropriate action before anger has a chance to build. This skill involves developing early warning systems that alert you to problematic situations before they become anger-provoking crises. Learn to recognize when others are beginning to take advantage of your kindness, when your workload is becoming unsustainable, when your relationships are developing unhealthy patterns, or when other issues are emerging that will eventually require attention. Addressing problems early, when emotions are calm and communication is easier, prevents the accumulation of resentment that eventually explodes into anger. This proactive approach to problem solving eliminates many of the situations that typically trigger anger while building confidence in your ability to handle challenges effectively. Practice viewing yourself as the CEO of your own life, responsible for monitoring conditions and making adjustments as needed to maintain optimal functioning. This perspective helps you stay engaged with managing your circumstances rather than becoming a passive victim of whatever happens to you. Develop the habit of regular life review, examining your relationships, work situation, health habits, and other important areas to identify emerging issues that need attention. Address these issues promptly and directly rather than hoping they will resolve themselves or waiting until they become urgent. Conclusion: the path to unshakable inner peace. You now possess 8 powerful rules that can destroy anger and upset forever, transforming you from someone who is constantly buffeted by emotional storms into someone who maintains unshakable inner peace, regardless of external circumstances. These are not mere techniques, but fundamental shifts in how you perceive and respond to the challenges of human existence. The journey from emotional reactivity to inner mastery is not quick or easy, but it is completely achievable for anyone willing to commit to consistent practice. Every moment you choose to focus on what you control rather than what you cannot control, every time you separate facts from interpretations, every instance when you apply the view from above or practice negative visualization, you are building the mental muscles that will eventually grant you complete emotional freedom. The discipline of desire teaches you to hold your wants lightly, finding peace regardless of whether your preferences are satisfied. Mastering the initial impression gives you conscious choice over your emotional responses rather than being the victim of automatic reactions. Remembering impermanence provides perspective during difficulties and appreciation during good times. Transforming anger into constructive action ensures that challenging emotions serve your growth rather than destroying your peace. These practices work together to create a fundamental transformation in your relationship with life itself. Instead of needing favorable circumstances to feel good, you develop the ability to remain centered and strong regardless of what happens around you. Instead of being angry when reality fails to match your preferences, you learn to work skillfully with whatever reality provides you. This transformation affects every area of your life. Your relationships improve because you are no longer bringing the energy of anger and resentment to your interactions with others. Your work becomes more effective because you can think clearly and respond strategically rather than reactively. Your health improves because you are no longer subjecting your body to the stress of chronic anger and upset. Most importantly, you develop genuine self-respect because you are no longer controlled by emotions and circumstances. You become someone who can be counted on to respond thoughtfully to challenges, to maintain principles under pressure, and to find strength in the midst of difficulty. This inner strength is not dependent on external validation or perfect circumstances, but on your own character and wisdom. The Stoics who developed these practices lived through wars, plagues, political upheaval, and personal tragedies that make most modern challenges seem manageable by comparison. They proved that human beings can maintain dignity, purpose, and inner peace, regardless of external circumstances. You have access to the same wisdom and the same capacity for transformation. Your old life, characterized by emotional reactivity, anger, and upset, can end today. Your new life, built on the foundation of Stoic wisdom and sustained by daily practice, can begin with your next choice to apply these principles. The person you are capable of becoming, someone with unshakable inner peace and emotional mastery, is waiting for you to stop making excuses and start making changes. The path ahead requires daily commitment, but it leads to a destination that makes every effort worthwhile: complete freedom from the anger and upset that have been controlling your life. You have the knowledge, you have the tools, and you have the capacity. All that remains is the choice to begin and the commitment to continue until these practices become as natural as breathing. Your transformation into someone with unshakable inner peace begins now. Make it count.